On December 11, 2024, at 0347 hours local time, a Japanese maritime self-defense force destroyer detected something extraordinary on its Aegis radar system sweeping the East China Sea. The FCS-3A phased array radar, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously across a radius of 500 kilometers, had locked onto a flight profile that should not exist yet, not from Japan. But the signature was unmistakable. Japanese, and moving at speeds that redefined what the region thought possible from a nation that had spent 80 years walking a constitutional tightrope between pacifism and self-defense. The contact was traveling at Mach 3+, hypersonic, a missile test, but not just any test. This was the first confirmed launch of Japan's indigenously developed hypersonic cruise missile, a weapon system that defense analysts had dismissed as years away from operational capability. The test came exactly 48 hours after China conducted its own hypersonic glide vehicle demonstration over the South China Sea. Coincidence? The Japanese Ministry of Defense released a statement 12 hours later. Clinical, professional, the language buried the magnitude, successful test of next-generation precision strike capability, development ahead of schedule. What that statement did not mention was the seismic shift occurring beneath the surface of Northeast Asian security architecture. Japan was not just testing a missile, Japan was announcing its arrival as a military technology power capable of indigenous development that rivals, and in some cases exceeds, anything China or Russia field in the region. Every capital from Beijing to Moscow to Pyongyang understood exactly what that meant. For decades, the narrative held firm. Japan possessed a technologically sophisticated but constitutionally restrained military force. The self-defense forces, defensive by design, limited by Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which renounced war as a sovereign right. Reality painted a different picture, but the perception shaped regional dynamics. China could expand, North Korea could provoke, Russia could pressure. Japan would respond with diplomatic protests and incremental defensive improvements, a sleeping giant that preferred sleep. That calculation no longer applies. Japan has awakened, not with dramatic constitutional revisions or nationalistic fervor, but with something far more destabilizing: indigenous military technology development at a pace and sophistication level that regional adversaries failed to anticipate. The hypersonic missile test represents just one visible manifestation of a transformation years in the making, now accelerating beyond anyone's projected timeline. Start with what Japan already possessed. The Maritime Self-Defense Force operates one of the most capable naval forces on the planet. 8 Aegis destroyers operate with the same combat systems that anchor American carrier strike group defense. The Maya-class destroyers carry the Aegis baseline J7 system, incorporating Japanese indigenous improvements that some American naval officers privately admit exceed certain US capabilities. They do not just defend Japanese waters, they form an integrated air and missile defense network that can engage threats across the entire Sea of Japan and significant portions of the East China Sea. Submarine capability tells a similar story. Japan operates 22 submarines, more than any nation except China, Russia, and the United States. The Taigai-class boats incorporate lithium-ion battery technology, making them the first operational submarines in the world to completely abandon lead-acid batteries. The tactical advantage? Longer submerged endurance, faster charging, greater power available for sensors and weapons. Chinese diesel-electric submarines still rely on air-independent propulsion systems that require complex fuel logistics. Japanese boats charge like electric cars, faster, simpler, more reliable. Then consider the F-35 fleet. Japan operates over 90 F-35A and F-35B fighters, the largest F-35 force outside the United States. But here the narrative shifts from buyer to developer. Japan is not just operating American fighters. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries manufactures significant F-35 components, including the advanced forward fuselage. Japanese engineers did not just learn to build parts, they learned to build stealth aircraft. That knowledge does not stay contained to a single program. The Next Generation Fighter program, previously known as FX, and now designated the Global Combat Air Program in partnership with the United Kingdom and Italy, represents Japan's leap into indigenous 5th generation plus fighter development. The demonstrator aircraft, the X-2 Shinshin, flew years ago, small, experimental, but it proved Japanese industry could master stealth shaping, advanced materials, and fly-by-light flight controls. The full-scale fighter will incorporate technology that current F-35 aircraft do not possess. Loyal wingman drone integration, directed energy weapons, sensor fusion beyond current standards. The expected operational date is 2035. Some intelligence assessments suggest Japan could field prototypes by 2030. Now return to that hypersonic missile. The technical challenge of hypersonic flight isn't just speed, it's sustained speed with maneuverability. Ballistic missiles reach hypersonic velocities during re-entry, but their trajectories are predictable. Hypersonic cruise missiles maintain Mach 5+ speeds while maneuvering, making interception exponentially more difficult. Hypersonic glide vehicles separate from a rocket booster and glide through the upper atmosphere, adjusting course to evade defenses. Japan's test reportedly involved a scramjet-powered hypersonic cruise missile. Scramjet, supersonic combustion ramjet, an engine that breathes atmospheric oxygen while traveling at hypersonic speeds, eliminating the need to carry oxidizer and dramatically extending range compared to rocket-powered systems. The United States has struggled to field operational scramjet weapons. Russia's Zircon missile reportedly uses scramjet propulsion, but operational deployment remains limited. China claims hypersonic capabilities but has not publicly demonstrated sustained scramjet flight. Japan just did. And the test parameters leaked through intelligence channels paint an even more concerning picture for regional rivals. The missile reportedly maintained controlled flight for over 8 minutes, covering more than 400 kilometers, while executing programmed maneuvers to simulate evasive action against interceptors. Terminal velocity exceeded Mach 5.5. The warhead section separated cleanly and struck within 3 meters of the target point. For a developmental test, first flight, Chinese defense analysts published assessments within 48 hours. The language was measured, but the concern was evident. Japan's progress in hypersonic technology potentially exceeds initial intelligence estimates. Further monitoring required. Translation: we didn't see this coming, and we need to figure out how far ahead they actually are. But the hypersonic program exists as just one element of a broader technology surge. Japan recently unveiled plans to develop and deploy counter-strike capabilities by 2027. Counter-strike is the Japanese government's careful terminology for what everyone else calls offensive strike capability. It is the ability to hit enemy bases before they launch attacks against Japan. For a nation that spent 8 decades constitutionally limited to purely defensive operations, this represents a doctrinal earthquake. The systems under development include extended-range cruise missiles, ground-launched anti-ship missiles with land attack capability, and modifications to existing weapons to enable strike missions. The Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, currently deployed for coastal defense, is being upgraded to a ground-launched cruise missile with a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers. That range envelope covers significant portions of North Korea and reaches into coastal China. Japanese officials carefully note these weapons serve purely defensive purposes, enabling Japan to neutralize threats before they materialize. Beijing and Pyongyang see offensive strike weapons pointed at their territory. Space capabilities add another dimension. Japan operates its own constellation of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance satellites. The Information Gathering Satellites program includes both optical and synthetic aperture radar satellites, providing all-weather day-night coverage of regional threats. Japan does not just buy satellite imagery from allies, Japan collects its own intelligence, independent and indigenous. That independent capability matters. American intelligence sharing comes with American priorities and American restrictions. Japanese satellites serve Japanese interests exclusively. The space program extends beyond passive observation. Japan is developing satellite-based early warning capabilities to detect ballistic missile launches. The current system relies on ground-based radars and American satellite data. The indigenous early warning constellation will provide independent detection and tracking, reducing dependence on US systems and enabling faster response times. Launch detection from space typically occurs within 30 seconds of ignition. Ground radar detection takes longer because the missile must rise above the radar horizon. Those seconds matter when hypersonic weapons cross hundreds of kilometers in minutes. Japan is also investing heavily in electronic warfare and cyber capabilities. The details remain classified, but defense budget allocations and organizational changes tell the story. The Self-Defense Forces established a dedicated cyber defense command in 2022. Budget increases for electromagnetic spectrum operations exceed 300% over 3 years. Japanese defense contractors are developing advanced electronic warfare suites for integration into fighters, ships, and ground units. The message is clear. Future conflicts will be decided as much in the electromagnetic spectrum and cyberspace as in physical domains. Now consider the industrial base enabling this transformation. Japan possesses a sophisticated defense industry with capabilities that rival anyone except the United States. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries doesn't just build ships and aircraft. They build the most advanced diesel-electric submarines in service anywhere. Kawasaki Heavy Industries manufactures transport aircraft, helicopters, and components for advanced fighters. IHI Corporation produces jet engines, including the XF91 engine designed for Japan's next-generation fighter. That engine will produce over 15,000 kilograms of thrust, with thrust vectoring and advanced stealth features. These companies are not subsidiaries of American or European corporations. They are Japanese firms with indigenous design capabilities, manufacturing expertise, and research programs pushing the boundaries of military technology. When Japan decided to develop hypersonic missiles, scramjet engines, advanced stealth fighters, and space-based early warning systems, Japanese industry could execute those programs domestically. Some components might come from partners, but the core technology, systems integration, and manufacturing are all Japanese. The strategic implications cascade across the region like a tactical shockwave. For China, Japanese military modernization fundamentally alters the security calculus in the East China Sea and Taiwan Strait. Chinese military planning for a Taiwan scenario always assumed Japan would remain a secondary concern, a host for American bases, but not an independent military threat capable of decisive intervention. That assumption no longer holds. Japanese counterstrike capabilities threaten Chinese air bases, naval facilities, and missile sites across the eastern seaboard. Chinese planners must now account for Japanese strikes against military infrastructure, complicating attack timelines and force allocation. Meanwhile, Japanese submarines operating with lithium-ion batteries can patrol choke points longer and quieter than before, threatening Chinese naval and amphibious operations. Japanese Aegis destroyers provide a layered missile defense network that complicates Chinese missile saturation attacks. The result? Any Chinese military action toward Taiwan now must factor in Japanese capabilities that can significantly degrade Chinese military effectiveness even before American forces arrive. Japan becomes not just a logistical platform for United States intervention, but an independent military actor capable of shaping the battle space. That changes timelines, risk calculations, and strategic planning across the People's Liberation Army. For North Korea, the equation shifts differently, but just as dramatically. North Korean nuclear and missile programs always relied on a simple calculation: develop weapons that threaten Japan and South Korea, deter American intervention, and maintain regime security. Japanese counterstrike capabilities destroy that calculation. North Korea can no longer assume its missiles and nuclear infrastructure remains safe behind sovereign borders. Japanese cruise missiles with 1,000-kilometer ranges can hold North Korean facilities at risk. Japanese intelligence satellites provide targeting data. Japanese cyber capabilities can potentially disrupt North Korean command and control. Kim Jong-un built nuclear weapons to ensure regime survival. Now Japan possesses the capability to eliminate those weapons in their silos, on their launchers, and in their storage facilities before they launch. That is not deterrence. That is an existential threat from a nation North Korea never considered a direct military danger. Russia watches from the north. Japanese territorial disputes with Russia over the Kuril Islands have simmered for decades. Russian military focus remains primarily on Europe and Ukraine, but the Far East cannot be ignored when Japan demonstrates hypersonic capabilities, advanced submarines, and indigenous military technology that rivals or exceeds Russian systems in several categories. The Russian Pacific Fleet already faces challenges maintaining readiness. A technologically advanced Japanese military that can operate independently of American support compounds Russian strategic problems in a region where Russian military presence has degraded significantly since the Cold War ended. South Korea presents perhaps the most complex dynamic. South Korea and Japan maintain difficult historical relations, and both nations pursue their own advanced military modernization programs. South Korea develops indigenous fighters, submarines, and missile systems. South Korea exports military technology globally. Japanese advances do not threaten South Korea directly, but they create a regional arms race where three advanced economies compete for technological superiority. Cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo could create a formidable counter to Chinese and North Korean threats. Historical animosity and political tensions make that cooperation uncertain at best. The United States finds itself in an interesting position. American strategy in the Indo-Pacific relies heavily on Japanese bases, logistics, and support. A stronger, more capable Japan should theoretically benefit American interests. But Japanese independence in military technology and capability reduces Japanese dependence on American systems, American intelligence, and American strategic decision-making. Japan, with hypersonic missiles, advanced fighters, and counter-strike capability, can act independently. That independence serves American interests when Japanese and American goals align. When they diverge even slightly, American leverage decreases. Some American officials privately express concern about technology transfer and intellectual property protection. Japanese firms gained access to American military technology through decades of licensed production and partnership programs. That technology now feeds into indigenous Japanese programs that potentially create competitors to American systems in the global arms market. Japan will not export hypersonic missiles tomorrow, but the Mitsubishi FX fighter could eventually compete with American designs for international sales. Japanese submarines already attract interest from nations seeking advanced diesel-electric boats. The arms race accelerates. China responds to Japanese developments with increased defense spending, accelerated weapons programs, and more aggressive military posturing. North Korea doubles down on missile development and nuclear weapons production. Russia reinforces Far East military districts despite commitments elsewhere. South Korea advances its own programs faster. Every action triggers reactions, and reactions trigger counter-reactions. The cycle feeds itself. Japan develops hypersonic missiles because China deployed hypersonic systems. China expands its hypersonic arsenal because Japan demonstrated indigenous capability. North Korea pursues more advanced missiles because Japan can now strike North Korean territory. Round and round. Each step justified as defensive, each step raising tensions, each step making conflict more possible through miscalculation, accident, or crisis escalation. Military technology development creates its own momentum. Programs that take a decade to develop cannot be stopped easily once started. Budgets approved 3 years ago fund systems being tested today. Treaties signed or abandoned years ago shape current capabilities. The arms race does not pause for diplomacy or changed circumstances. It grinds forward, driven by institutional inertia, military planning cycles, and the simple fact that no nation wants to fall behind in capabilities that might determine survival in a future conflict. Japan's transformation from a constitutionally restrained self-defense force to a technologically advanced military power capable of offensive strikes represents the most significant shift in Northeast Asian security dynamics since North Korea tested nuclear weapons. The implications extend beyond regional military balance. Japan's success at indigenous military technology development demonstrates that advanced defense capabilities no longer remain the exclusive domain of the United States, Russia, and China. Mid-tier economic powers with technological sophistication can develop and field weapon systems that challenge great power military dominance. Other nations watch and learn. South Korea already follows a similar path. Australia increases defense spending and pursues advanced capabilities. Taiwan studies Japanese developments closely, seeing a model for how a democratic US ally can build independent military power while maintaining alliance relationships. Even European nations take notice, recognizing that American security guarantees may require supplementation with indigenous capabilities. The world Japan's developments help create is more multipolar, more competitive, and more dangerous. More nations possess advanced weapons. More militaries operate sophisticated systems. More governments have the capability to act independently in their regions. That distribution of military power might create stability through balance, or it might create instability through competition and miscalculation. December 11th's hypersonic missile test will be remembered not as a single event, but as a marker, a point where regional rivals recognized that Japan had crossed a threshold. The nation that lost World War II, that accepted constitutional limitations on military power, that focused on economic development rather than military expansion, that nation just demonstrated it can build weapons that terrify its neighbors and impress its allies. What happens next depends on choices made in Tokyo, Beijing, Pyongyang, Moscow, Seoul, and Washington. Does Japan's military rise prompt diplomatic engagement and arms control discussions, or does it accelerate competitive military development? Do regional powers find ways to manage tensions and reduce risks, or do they double down on military solutions to security challenges? Does the United States successfully manage alliance relationships with an increasingly independent Japan, or do those relationships fray under the pressure of diverging interests? The answers will determine whether Northeast Asia slides toward confrontation or finds a new equilibrium. Right now, the trajectory points toward escalation. Every missile test, every weapons program, every capability demonstration adds fuel to a fire that is burning hotter. Japan sparked this particular arms race, but everyone keeps feeding it. Terrified might be exactly the right word for how regional rivals should feel, because Japan just proved it can compete with anyone in military technology development. That competition does not end. It escalates until something forces it to stop. War, economic collapse, diplomatic breakthrough, something. Until then, the race continues. And Japan just took the lead.